Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar about moving over to Capture One and understanding the differences in file management if you're coming from Lightroom or Aperture. So that's what we're going to attempt to cover today. If this is your first webinar and you don't know who you're listening to, my name is David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. So we have a 60-minute session, which I'm sure we managed to fill up with lots of good stuff today. It is very important that you feel you can interact. So if you look at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, if you're watching us on a Mac or PC, you'll see a section called questions, and you can put a question in there and that will come straight through to me. If you're on your Android device or iOS device, again, you can see a question mark icon on the screen, and if you tap that, it will come straight through to me as well. I am recording the session too, so don't feel you have to be a superstar and remember everything. You can watch it again at a later date on our webinar archive, which is on our YouTube channel. Details of that YouTube channel and the playlist you'll get in a follow-up email in a few days' time. So that's pretty much all the housekeeping side of things. So let's move over to Capture One. Just bear with me while we switch monitors and turn a few things on and off, etc., etc. So in a second, you should be able to see Capture One up on screen now. And then we can begin as such. All right, so if you want a bit of help following the cursor, it will look like this when we're looking at something interesting. Appreciate it's a bit difficult to sometimes see it, so I shall try to move as slowly as possible. All right, so those of you who are used to Lightroom or Aperture, of course, know or sort of understand the principle very well of having a catalog or a library, as you may know it, and then organizing your images in a catalog or library. In Capture One, we refer to it as a catalog, but it's exactly the same principle as a library in Aperture or indeed a catalog in Lightroom. So a catalog being a database, which knows the location of your images and certain things about them, like the adjustment, metadata, keywords, and so on and so forth. So the principle is no different, really. It's just the way you perhaps handle the files is a little bit different as well. So what we're trying to cover is importing images into the catalog, handling things like locating files or folders that you might have moved, differences between managed images and referenced images, something that was very popular in Aperture, letting Aperture manage the location of the raw files for you. We'll have a look at the sort of workspace side of things and keyboard shortcuts if you want to try to align that a little better with what you're used to. And then, of course, we'll also have a look at importing your current Aperture catalog or your current Lightroom catalog directly into Capture One as a bit of a shortcut. So I think what we'll do first is that we will make a new catalog, and then we'll just import some images from a hard drive, see how that works, and then we can see the difference between moving them from, say, a referenced file and a managed file, and so on. Okay, so first of all, let's make a new catalog. Very simple. File, new catalog up at the top here. And we need a name for a catalog. So let's call this David's catalog. Seems like a sensible name. And the location of where you want to store this catalog. By default, it will go into your pictures folder, but you can have any other location. I'll just choose Webinar Wednesday, for example, and say choose. So that's where our catalog database is going. This is very similar to the Lightroom LRCat, and if you're used to Aperture, just so you can see, very similar to this one, the Aperture library. So no real difference there for Capture One. Notice something here, open in new window, because you can have multiple catalogs open at the same time. You don't have to relaunch Lightroom, for example, or close down one library and open up another one. You can have multiple catalogs open at the same time, which can be quite handy. So we say OK. Now we have a brand new empty catalog open, and you can see the catalog I had open previously is just sitting behind it. Let's make this one expanded. So we have a brand new empty catalog. And just to be 100% clear, you can see what we've created: pictures, webinar Wednesday, David's catalog, like so. That's all we have. So very similar to the Aperture library. So this is the database part, tracks the location of images and knows certain things about them. And now the catalog is ready to receive images. Probably no prizes for guessing that this is a good place to start. Import images, the last button in the center of the screen. It's also the same button here up in the top left, and also we can say import images up here. Take your pick. Okay, and then that way you'll be able to get started. So I'm just going to click the large import button in the middle, and then like so we get an import window popping up. So somewhat different to the way sort of Aperture and Lightroom works, but you'll see it is actually very straightforward. Okay, so what you need to do when you're importing images is just follow something on the left-hand side here. Just follow the bars down on the left-hand side. If you're in a super hurry, you only really need to pay attention to import from and import to. The rest in your early stages of learning, if you like, you can forget about. It's not super significant to the import process. So first of all, import from. Where do you want to import your images from? You'll see here, if I click on this menu bar, then there's some recent locations here, and there's also the ability to select folder. If you're importing from a memory card, like an SD card or a CF card, it will pop up automatically and you'll see the contents of your SD card. But what I'm going to do today, I'm just take the example that perhaps you've already got some images on an existing hard drive, whether that's external or internal, and that way you can see how that works too. So I'm just going to say select folder here and then browse to a location. Now I've got an external USB drive attached, which is where we're going to import some images from. So we've got images to import here like so, and there's a number of subfolders. I'm not going to import tons and tons of images because we don't want to sit here and look at a progress bar, for example. So we're just going to import a few folders here, or subfolders if you like, which, as you can see, contain a number of raw files. Kevin was asking, I see you're using Sony files. Do I have any Fuji RAW files? Not in this selection, I don't think, but if there's time, we can always dig one out later. But they don't really require any different handling, to be honest. But we'll have a look at some Fuji files if we get a chance. Peter was asking, can we change the background color of the import window? No, you can't as such, but it is a separate floating window, so it should be fairly obvious. So I'm going to target this folder, images to import. Let's say open. That's going to show the images which are contained within that folder structure if you make sure you say include subfolders. If that's not checked, then I get nothing, because there's nothing in that parent folder except other folders. So it's important that I say include subfolders so that the images are read in. And you can see up the top we've got 111 files, for example, to import. So where do we want to import to? A few options here. Current location, so that means they're going to stay on that hard drive. Capture One's not going to move them anywhere at all. They simply stay on the hard drive, but the catalog will know how to access them. Inside catalog, Aperture users, be aware. This is the same terminology as having managed files. Managed files, so that means they're copied internally inside the Capture One catalog itself, much like you could do in Aperture, a feature which wasn't possible in Lightroom. So those of you using Lightroom probably would have never heard of or appreciate that option. But basically what that means is that you have an all-in-one catalog. So this is the only file you see. On Windows, this is actually a set of a few folders because we can't package it up like we can do on the Mac, for example, but this will contain all your raw files and adjustments and so on if you choose to store file inside catalog. Now that's a very simple way of doing things, But the only issue is, of course, is that once this catalog grows and grows and grows, it's probably going to outgrow the disk that it's stored on. So by storing images outside the catalog, you've got a much more flexible options of where you want to put it. The only sort of advantage of going inside the catalog is that it's kind of simple, but it's much more restrictive. So I'm just going to say current location. They're going to stay on that hard drive. Now, if you had a memory card, for example, then you could choose where you wanted to store them, wherever you decide is your final destination for your raw files. But let's just say current location. Now, as I said, if you're in a hurry or you don't want to learn anymore, import from and import to, that's all you have to worry about. You can do a simultaneous backup. You can have renaming options. You can add some basic metadata. You can add some adjustments as you import in the form of a Capture One style. And a style is just basically a collection of adjustments in Capture One saved as a style. The difference between a style and a preset is that a preset is one particular tool. So if you want to add a metadata template, for example, then you could do so, which had your name and address and contact details. If there's time, we'll look at how to create those. So that's all good to go. Now we can simply say import all, and we see the images popping in like so. See, it's pretty fast. If I just select on them here, you can see that that import has taken place. Now, what's happily chugging away in the background now is that if we look at the activity window up here, is that Capture One is merrily creating previews. Again, much like Lightroom does and Aperture does as well. Good question from Ray. Is it okay to import existing files already converted to DNG rather than the camera raw files? To be honest, if you can keep the manufacturer's raw file, it's much, much better. There is absolutely no benefit to having a DNG file in Capture One as such. No benefit whatsoever. The manufacturer's raw file is what we base our camera profiles on. We always get the camera in-house. To do all the profiling and so on. We create a ridiculous number of images, about 700 images before we add support in Capture One, and a great deal of care is taken over that color profiling and so on. We have more data in the raw file, manufacturer's raw file, to achieve that. We are working towards better support of DNG. So if you are, say, importing from Lightroom, and you already have a bunch of DNG files, then we will be able to better support that in the future. But it makes more sense to keep the manufacturer's original raw file. Okay, a couple of people asking about duplicates. Currently, there is no sort of duplicate handling of stuff. It will import the same images twice. So just take care in your workflow that you're not importing the same images. So just think about your memory card management and so on. Ian is asking about sessions and so on. I wasn't going to talk much about sessions today because sessions is unique to Capture One in terms of file management. If you want to know more about that, then there is a previous webinar that you can pick up on the archive, which compares catalogs to sessions. Sessions, if we just cover that quickly, I'll just show you what a session looks like if you've never seen one. It's basically this, a group of nested folders. So you have a capture folder, an output folder, a selects folder, and a trash folder. So you can organize your images in there. But really a session is designed as kind of a one hit. So this is for a particular job like someone's wedding, like a particular event and so on. And all of it is bundled up in one nested folder. So it works really well for tethered capture, works really well for single projects, but it's not designed to have an overview of, say, 10,000 images or 20,000 images. It's designed as a project by project system, but it's very, very useful and something that I use quite a lot. So the idea is that your captures reside here, the outputs reside there, the selects reside there, and the dumped images go there, and that session can be moved anywhere you like. So it's a great system. So Ian, that's why with sessions, there isn't an option really to store images in their current location because it doesn't really fit with the ethos of how a session works. Yes, Thomas, you have to import files even when they're on the hard drive because a catalog is a database. It's not a browser. It's not a file browser. You're importing images into a catalog so that catalog is aware of where they are. So it's not really a browser-based system. There isn't a max file size for your photos, Wendy. No, there is no restriction on that as such. Tim was asking, can you adjust the timestamp? I know that's an Aperture option, but there isn't an ability to do that in Capture One. One thing that I didn't show as we're just keeping it simple, if you want to change the location of your files, for example, if you're coming from an SD card, obviously you can choose a folder. So let's just pick a random folder, and you can add subfolders as well. So if you are importing from an SD card, you're not restricted to a single folder. You can have subfolders either by typing in here to create folders or by using this button here to automatically create folders on something like, for example, the image date or day of the month as such, or image date, for example. If you watch last week's webinar, actually, about importing, culling, and processing, I go into a lot more detail about that. So if you didn't see last week's webinar, pick that up. Okay, so that's just a basic import. So what's happened in Capture One? You can see it happens pretty fast. Previews are built nice and quickly. The previews, incidentally, you can adjust the size of. So if we look at the preferences, you can see under image, you can change the preview image size. You can go up to 5K if you want, 5,120 if you have a monitor big enough for that. And all that means basically, if we're looking at an image in Capture One, obviously we're looking at a preview here, the same way that Aperture works and that Lightroom works. The reason why we're looking at previews is that we can go through images nice and fast, no problem at all, because we're just looking at the preview as such. When we zoom in, of course, to 100%, we just double click to zoom in, that's when we start reading the raw data. But of course, my monitor here isn't super high resolution. It's not a 5K monitor, so there's no point me generating 5K previews. They are smart previews, so if we did happen to disconnect my image drive, which we'll do a bit later, then I can still browse the catalog and make adjustments. If you're used to using smart previews in Lightroom, that's exactly the same thing. Yes, Paul, the previews are created as a background task. So once the import is done, previews are happily made in the background in order that the image is popped up in, but there's nothing to stop you, say, grabbing an image down here, and then the preview will be prioritized on that one. So it's just really a seamless background task. Works really, really nicely. A couple of you asked, can I import the pictures directly in a specific album project? Yes, you can do. You'll see on the import window that you can say import into the selected album, but we're getting a little bit of ahead of ourselves there. So just hold that thought, and then we'll come back to that when we talk a bit more about the file management as such. So what's happened now in terms of where your images are and how they're displayed in Capture One and so on. On the left-hand side, you've got all your various different tool tabs, which we can look at a bit later, which contain all the various different adjustments in Capture One. The first one, which is what we're mostly concerned with today, is the Library tool tab, which is where you do all your file management as such. It's split into 3 sections: Catalog Collections, User Collections, and Folders. The first section, Catalog Collections, everything here is fixed. You can't edit anything in here. You basically have a shortcut link to every single image in your catalog. The last 10 recent imports, so you can always get back to them, which is quite handy. Recent captures if you've shot tethered, and stuff that you've dumped in the trash as well. User collections we'll come back to in a minute, but this is where you can do your virtual organization. And folders, this is where your actual images are. Where are your images? This is where they're shown in the folders tool. So if I expand out image drive new, this is what I imported, separated into their various different folders like so. So those of you who are used to Lightroom, you will be very used to kind of organizing your work in this section. Probably less used to organizing your work in this section. Those of you on Aperture will be probably more interested in user collections than you are in the folders area. Aperture is very good at the virtual organization side of things. And when I say virtual organization, I mean that nothing is moved around on disk. It's all created with albums and projects and so on. Those of you using Lightroom are probably more likely to do some organization in the folders area, because Lightroom was very much weaker than Aperture in terms of the virtual organization. Okay, so what can we do in this area? Lots of various different things, of course. So as I said, click in a folder shows you the contents on the thumbnail browser strip, like so, as you can see. Nothing too strange about that. Can I move files around? Yes, I can. It's just simple drag and drop process. Let's just make those a bit bigger. So if you wanted to move file from A to B, you can just drag and drop. If you want to move it back, you can just drag and drop, like so. That can be obviously a selection of images that you can move between folders, like so, and they are physically moved on the hard disk. Then if you wanted to move them somewhere else, you can just move them back. All of that stuff fairly obvious. If you want to make the catalog aware of additional folder, so if you want to move some images out of here into another folder, you can do so. Probably the best and easiest way to do that is to use the plus button. So let's say we wanted to make an additional folder here. We could say new folder, and let's just call that selects, for want of a better word, and say add down at the bottom here. And now this is a folder which the catalog is now aware of. So if we wanted to, we could move images to there. And just to show you, it does physically, where are they on the hard drive? Sorry, my mistake. It does physically move the images around, like so. So if we take this one back out, then we can go and it's gone. So that's just simple drag and drop selection, like so. You can't drag folders into one another. That's something you'd have to do in the Finder, for example. But the basic stuff you can do here. So remember, plus to make a folder aware, or the catalog aware of a folder, minus to get rid of it. So if we didn't want this folder in our catalog, we could say minus and it's gone. You do get a warning if it contains images, for example. Now, if you were to accidentally do something in the Finder, because you should try and keep all those various moving operations to Capture One, because this way the catalog can keep track of the changes. But let's say we moved a whole folder. Let's just move Rob to a totally different location, like so. Now straight away you can see the exclamation mark, because this folder is not where Capture One expects it to be. We can still see the images. They're shown as offline because, again, Capture One is not aware of where they are. You can see it says offline at the top. So how do we re-establish that connection? If we right-click and we say locate, then we can tell Capture One where that folder is. It's actually down here, and say open. So now it's re-established back into the right place. So that's a right-click and locate if you need to relocate a folder. So if I were to move it back into its rightful place over here, again it says it's offline. So if I right-click and say locate, and then go back to where it is, it's right there, and say open, now it's back in the right spot. Similarly, if you happen to move an image or images in Capture One, let's say we take number 131 and we put that in London, like so. Now it's saying it's offline. So what I can do is right-click on the image itself and say locate. This will just locate the image, and then I put in London, didn't I? It's down here, and say open. Now it's re-established and it's moved it to the London folder, probably down the bottom there, like so. So that's why it's just a lot easier if you do a drag and drop within Capture One, because then you don't have to go through that locate process as such. Just looking at your questions, yes, there is an equivalent of collections, Robin. We're going to have a look at that next. How do I reset the counter, Ernst was asking. Well, if you're shooting tethered, you've got next capture adjustments, next capture naming, like so. If you've used a camera counter token, 3 buttons there, you can reset the capture counter, like so. If you're doing a file renaming, say you're doing a batch rename, if we selected a bunch of images and we right click and say batch rename, then again, 3 little dots up in the renaming tool, we can reset the renaming counter. So you'll find it there as such. Philip was asking, if you import pictures into a folder, can you import them into a catalog? Yes, of course you can. Yep. As we did at the start, you saw that we imported images that were just sitting on a folder. So an import process is basically making the catalog aware of the images that you want in your catalog. You can move them in that process, you can copy them in that process, or you can leave them where they are. It's entirely up to you. Ray is saying, can you alter the quality level of the previews to speed up the import process? Only the size. It's really simple in Capture One. It's basically preview image size, whether small, that will be much faster to import but low quality, higher quality but slower to import. But as you saw, it's a background task, and Capture One prioritizes it depending on which image you're looking at. So really, there's no benefit to having sort of crappy previews just to make the process faster. If it's 10,000 images, just let Capture One chug away overnight or something like that. Most of us will be importing how many images in a particular or in a typical photo project? 500, 1,000? It's not a lot really. And at some point you're going to want them good quality anyway. So why not just start with good quality in the first place? Okay. Trevor was asking, how do you manage files within the catalog, for example, the location and date? Location-wise, if you've got GPS coordinates, you could manage them by location. You could manage by date easy enough. As I said, if we were, say, importing from a memory card, tell you what, let's put a memory card in, for example. I'm not going to import these. I'll just show the kind of things you could do. So that's a memory card that I've popped in. So first of all, location is set automatically. Where do I want to store the files? Well, let's say I wanted to put them on my image drive here, and let's say I just wanted to put them in with this stuff. Let's just make a folder called images. And then if you wanted to divide up your images by date or location, you can do so in the subfolder option. So this subfolder option means I can type. So I could type a folder here. A Capture One will automatically make me a folder called Las Vegas. If I then want to step down in the file tree, then if I do a slash, then I could make another folder, for example, and so on. Or you can use tokens. So if you wanted to split up these images by date, if we click on the 3 dots here, these give you a bunch of available tokens how you can separate out the images. So if we look at the categories date and time, so I could say, well, image date, like so, and then there's a little arrow here and you can choose the date format. So if you wanted day, month, year, for example, then Capture One will split up the images based on their capture date, for example. If you wanted to do location, if you had GPS location, for example, in the metadata, it's under, where is it? Metadata GPS. Then you've got attitude, latitude, longitude. So you could always do latitude and longitude like that, for example. Again, if you want to know more about that, watch last week's in the archive, because I go into tons of detail about how you can use those different locations to divide up the images as such. Yes, you can rename files during import. It's just in the renaming section here, naming, like so. So under naming, you can rename them if you wish. Yes, you can round trip to Photoshop, Stephen. We'll have a look at that shortly. Denny was saying, can we create more formats for the image date? Well, you can actually create your own. So there is, if we look at date and time, again, you've got the image date here, like so. But if you don't like any of the available formats, you can just make your own, because you could say image day of the week, for example. You've got lettering there, for example. You've got image year, like so, year and year. Then you could separate it with a hyphen, and then you could put image month. You can choose how you want the month to be shown and so on, like that. So really, you could just create your own date format if you want to. So you don't really need us to do anything else. So there you go, Denny. If you want year, month, day, just make it yourself. Okay. Right. So we've got the basic stuff you can see here. We've moved images, we've relocated folders, we've created folders using the plus button, we've deleted folders using the minus button. Now, what about managed files and referenced files? So these are all reference files, as you can remember. So sitting on that section, sorry, those folders in the hard drive. Now, if you want to make them managed, i.e. stored inside the catalog themselves, very easy, drag and drop to the catalog icon. And that moves the file inside the catalog itself. So if we just go to pictures, there we go, David's catalog, the image is now sitting inside the catalog itself. See, it's grown somewhat to 260 megabytes. Let's grab another one, put that inside the catalog. We're now at 277 megabytes, for example. So that's physically moved it inside the catalog itself as a managed file. And you can see if I click on it, it's got two images which are now inside the catalog itself. If we want to take them back out, we can just drag and drop and pop them back outside the catalog like so. Really simple, just a drag and drop location, bit simpler than Aperture, I think, for example. And you always have your image count there. I think that probably concludes what you can do down there. As I said, I think Lightroom was stronger in this area for sort of folder operations, I'll be perfectly honest. But Aperture is definitely stronger in the virtual collection side, which is what we're going to look at now. Oh, just to finish up one thing, if I totally eject image drive, and let's just unplug it, you can see everything has a question mark because it can't be found, but we can still browse all the images. We can still make adjustments as you can see. So there's nothing to stop us still messing around with our images, even if we don't have access to the raw files. It's basically what I do. I have all my images on external hard drives, and I have the catalog database on the internal SSD of the laptop. So I've always got access to all my images. The only sort of downfall of this way is that if you want to export, obviously you need to have access to the raw files. Again, you'll see if I just connect image drive back up, let's get the Finder up, you'll see once it comes active down here, image drive is up, and then now we've got the everything back online. So simple. Previews are stored inside the catalog itself. Who was asking that? That was Ernst. So all those previews are stored inside the catalog, tucked away in there. On the PC, you'll actually see a folder called David's catalog, and it has a number of folders inside. On the Mac, actually, and I don't suggest you do this. This is just to show you. Show package contents. This is what's inside the catalog. So previews, thumbnails, original files, the database, and right lock means that as I have the catalog open, nobody else can touch it. Do not mess around in here. This is just to show you. On the PC, you'll see this stuff in various different folders because we can't package it down. Peony is asking, can I rename to the name in the original photo number? Yes, pretty much you can do anything like that. So if you look at naming, if you want to choose the naming convention, click on the square button, and then you can use your own counter, or you can use the image counter, I think it's called. It is there somewhere. Might just have to search for it. It's one of those tokens anyway. Basically, you can pull that up, and then you can use the original camera counter number or file name. How big is my catalog file? Alan was asking. Well, I've got 12,000 images, and I think it's about, I can't remember actually. I might be lying if I say it's 10 gig, I think, but it might be less than that. I can't remember. How can I move the data from one external hard disk to another? Oh yeah, good question. Before we get on to the virtual side of things, let's say my image drive totally crapped out and I needed to use my backup. because I personally have all my raw data in one parent folder, I could just relocate this parent folder. But if I wanted to move images to a totally different place, we could do this. If we say plus, let's just choose a section on the internal hard drive. So remember, these images are on that little external USB drive. So let's make a new folder here called, let's just call it new location, for example. Add. So now the catalog is aware of this new location, like so. Now if I wanted to move all of these images or just some of these images to the new location, I can just drag and drop. 1, 2, 3. Now they're moved to that pictures, new location, like so. So as long as the catalog is aware of it, just make the catalog aware of that new location, whether that's a totally different hard drive, a server, or whatever, by using the plus button, and then just drag and drop. Simple as that. Try to do everything in the folders tool. If you start doing stuff in the Finder, then it gets a little bit more tricky, because then you've got to go around relocating everything and so on. Just try to do it in Capture One. It'll save you a lot more time in the future. So what about virtual organization side of things? This is again where Aperture is very strong, and so is Capture One. So let's just go to my All Images shortcut. So 111 images. We might like to organize these in some kind of way, or we might like to organize them similar to what they were on disk. Either way, that's totally up to you. Sorry, I was just looking at a question from, can I move the folder so I do not lose the folder structure? If you want to move folders, that is something. So if we wanted to move Rob, if you want to move folders, that is something you need to do in the Finder. So if we wanted to move the whole folder, for example, let's just get another window up. Let's say we wanted to move the entire folder from here, images to import. Let's say we wanted to move Rob Odes to here, for example, like so. So now you'll see this will become offline as such, and then we could just re-establish the new location if we wanted to. Oh, that was a copy, of course. So let's just delete that one. Okay, now you see it's offline, but I could go up here, right click and say locate, go to my new location and say open, and now everything is re-established. So folders you can't move in this area. Images and so on, making folders aware, deleting folders you can. If you want to move entire folders, do that in a Capture One. But if your import process is nice and slick, you shouldn't really have to do much sort of folder moving around. Yes, you can synchronize the contents of a folder. That was the last thing. Thanks for reminding me, Robert. Otherwise, I was going to forget that. So let's say, again, if we go to Rob and we just get rid of an image, for example, let's get rid of CR2. Send that to the bin, for example. You'll see it will be, right click, let's say show in Finder. This one here, then basically if we right click and we say synchronize, then it says remove one missing image from the catalog, sync, like so, and then it's basically sorted out. That's the easiest way to do it. Just right click and say synchronize, and if there's nothing to synchronize, then it doesn't show up. Let's say we do something outside again. Let's go back to image drive. Let's take number 2602 and just put it in London. And again, if we right click, see it's now showing as offline. If we right click and say synchronize and say sync, then it'll take that folder, that sort of image away as such. So that's really the best way to do it. Just right click and synchronize. Same goes if you've added images into a folder. You can right click and say synchronize, and it will pop up and say add new images to the catalog. To be honest, I would say try to use the import function if you can, because you can do a lot more powerful stuff to it. If you're using synchronize as a way to import, I don't think that's a very good way to do it because you don't have all these additional options. You can synchronize and then say ask to show the importer, which is a better way to do it. So if, for example, let's just throw in some different images, for example. Let's grab a few images there and just put them in London. So we've got some new images in London, hopefully. So let's right click and say synchronize. So import 5 new images into the catalog. So you could just say sync, but then I don't get all that additional benefit in the import window of being able to rename, add a style and so on. But we can say show importer and then say sync. And this way we can see what images are actually going in. Is that what I expect? And then you can do other stuff as well, like adding styles and adding basic metadata and so on and so forth. Okay. So yes, you can synchronize. Okay, so let's move on to the user collections before we run out of time. So let's just go back to all images. There's all our images which we might like to organize in some way. And here we have user collections where Aperture was very strong. So if we say plus, let's make a new project. Very similar to what we had in Aperture, but I guess displayed in a slightly different way. So let's just make a new project. Say I want to organize London 2014. So let's make a new project, London 2014, like so. This makes me a new project. Now, if I go to London and say want to select all and try and drag them in, it doesn't work. So probably a little bit different to Aperture that we can't dump images straight into a project like so. This looks like a cardboard box with a lid on it. So we're not just going to toss all our pictures in that cardboard box. We want to organize them in a bit more of a sensible way. So let's right click and say new inside and make an album and call that just say images, for example. And then this way we can go to our folder here and now we can drag images into an album. Now remember, this is all virtual organization, so we haven't moved anything around on disk and so on. A project can contain an unlimited number of albums, so if we wanted to right click and make another album, we could do, let's say we wanted to divide it up, the shard, that's this tall spiky building here, for example. We could put images in there of the shard. Now we've got 10 images. Then if we wanted to, we could make further albums, right click, of course, new inside, make an album. Let's just call that the docs. You get the idea. Then we could grab those images and drag them in there and so on. So that fairly obvious. Just remember, you can't put images in a project itself. They need to be in some albums. Then you're free, of course, to move images around between different albums. If I want to, of course, I can remove an image from an album if I wish. That's just a right click and so on. So all that stuff just free drag and dropping, very, very simple. Additionally, in a project, you can make a smart album, which works really nicely. So a smart album populates itself based on certain search criteria. There's tons of different search criteria you can add, which is all shown here by clicking plus. This is all the various search criteria that you could have. Let's do a really basic one using a preset like, say, 5-star or 4-star images or higher if we've rated them. So let's say 4-star or higher. See, greater than or equal to 4 stars and say OK. Now this makes me a smart album, which is currently empty. Now the smart album is only searching within this project. So it's only searching the 37 images that are in this project, not the remaining 70 plus images outside of this project. So this is what makes this really powerful. This is only looking inside this box for 4-star or higher images, of which there are currently none. So if I was to go here and say, well, I think this one is a 4-star images, press 4 on the keyboard, 1, 2, 3, 4, then straight away it goes inside here. If I was to downgrade this to 2, then it's gone. So that's the really nice thing about the smart albums, it's dynamic. That's why I think using this method of albums and smart albums is way more useful than trying to drag and drop images around from folder to folder on hard drive. Because this way it means I can have the same images appearing in different collections. So let's say, for example, we wanted to make another album, which I'll say I'm going to print these, for example, then I know that even though this image appears in the shard, there's no reason why it can't appear in print as well. Trying to do that by physically dragging raw files around on a hard drive, I don't think makes sense. It's way more fun and faster and cleverer to do it here, for example. Similar saying Lightroom, CC, you can do all the virtual stuff the same, but they don't have quite the same extensive set with the projects and so on and so forth. Aperture was better, and I certainly think Capture One is better because, of course, as I said, the most powerful thing is this smart album is searching within this project only. If we had a smart album outside of a project, let's call this a global 4 to 5 stars. And we choose our preset here, 4-star or higher. Then this smart album is searching the entire catalog. So if we make this one 5 stars, see it appears here, but it doesn't appear here, for example, because this image isn't part of this project. So you can do really nice organization with that. So a smart album outside of a project is really good to kind of watch your entire photographic collection for maybe your best images, images shot with a certain camera, images shot with a certain lens, and so on and so forth. There's a final one called, let's go back to all images, a final one called groups. This doesn't do anything smart as such. It just helps to organize this area. Because you could probably imagine once you end up with lots and lots of projects, this list can get very, very long. If we go back to the other catalog, you can see I've got various different projects here like so. So you can guess this could get bigger and bigger. So what you could do is that if we go to this one here and say group, we could make a group called something like, let's say, personal work. And it just looks like a pretty standard folder. And then I knew I could add certain projects to personal work if I wanted to. And then that just categorizes them nicely. So if you wanted to collapse a lot of projects that you don't want to look at, you can just pop them inside a group, for example. So groups don't do anything smart. It's just an additional way to help you organize this area once it starts to get a bit lengthy. Xavier saying, can you show how to create a smart album inside a project so that I can see all the images inside a project? If you click on the project, it doesn't show all the images contained in the albums. It does on a Mac. So if I click on the project, it shows me an inclusive way of doing that, but not currently on a PC. It's a feature we've got to add to a PC. So if you do want to see everything inside a project, just make something like an all images album, for example. Henrik saying, what's the best way to convert an Aperture library to Capture One? Well, we can do that as such, and that's the next thing we're going to come back to. I just want to make sure everything is tied up here in terms of user collections. Juan is also asking how to import all the information to another computer, say a new computer, for example. Well, there's nothing to stop you simply moving the catalog. It's a little bit easier than Aperture. So this catalog here, there's nothing to stop me moving this to a totally different place, computer or whatever, because the catalog knows where those images are. So again, if you move stuff around in the folders area, then you've got to be aware that you might need to relocate stuff. But the catalog is kind of can be where it needs to be, where it has to be. So if you do say get a new laptop, just make sure this catalog file goes to your new laptop, wherever that may be. So it's really simple to move that around. Just think of that as a very basic document. It's just saying this image belongs here, this image belongs there, this image belongs there. This is the preview that belongs with that image. These are the adjustments that belong with that image. So this can sit anywhere. For the best performance, it makes sense to have it sitting on the internal drive of the workstation that you're using, but it could equally sit over here or here or here. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Okay. Let's have a look at, as we've got 10 minutes remaining, let's have a look at importing, say, an Aperture catalog or a Lightroom catalog, or we could do both and then see how that looks. So let's say File, New Catalog, and say Aperture Import. So another brand new catalog. Let's just expand that up out like so. Very simple to do. I've got a really tiny Aperture library here. Doesn't contain much, but you'll see the principle. So we simply need to say File, Import Catalog, and choose Aperture Library. You'll get a warning saying we can import some things, but not all things. So projects, folders, albums, crop, straighten, rotation, flip, exposure, etc., metadata, etc. Color adjustments, they're not going to look the same. It's approximate. There's a totally different color engine in Capture One compared to Aperture, so it's kind of impossible to match like for like, but it's a head start. So we say continue, and then we need to choose our Aperture library like so, and say open. Have a look at what this message says. If the file is offline, it won't be imported. So it says try to attach the source device to retry importing. So offline files will be skipped. We can say skip all, and then you'll see the process, and then you get a catalog import complete dialog pop up. So 27 files imported, no incompatible files, 2 offline files skipped. And let's say OK. So what you'll see now automatically created in user collections is my projects that were in Aperture. So these are the 4 projects I had in Aperture, like so. They've just, because we can't put images in Capture One directly into the project, there's an automatic folder made which contain the various different images, like so. Down here in folders, we can see that it's showing me where they exist. So documents, Lightroom, because I just use the same set of images for Lightroom and Aperture. We do Lightroom next. So there was 3 folders here that existed in list location, and I had some images inside the Aperture library itself, so managed files. So these files, all the animal ones, were managed inside Aperture, and you can see they're 2 different locations. So inside the Aperture library, and like so, on the disk itself. Now at this point, there's nothing to stop you maintaining your Capture One catalog, looking at the same images that Aperture does. Okay, just bear in mind if you move anything here or here, you're going to break your Aperture catalog as such. Now if all of your images in Aperture are managed and you want to make them managed in your Capture One catalog, just remember what we did before, drag and drop them to the catalog icon themselves. However, be very aware that once you do that, your Aperture catalog is broken. So just think about that. If you think, well, I'm ready to make a total move to Capture One, we'd be very happy if you did, then just drag and drop to the catalog icon in Capture One, remembering that it will break your Aperture catalog. So if you don't do any move operations, then there's nothing to stop Capture One looking at the same images that Aperture is, if you want to experiment between the two. Pretty similar thing for Lightroom. Let's just say new catalog, call this, Lightroom import, like so. New catalog, didn't want to go full screen. Let's come out of that. Say file, import catalog, Lightroom. Continue. Where is my Lightroom catalog? It's in here, documents. So you just get .lrcat. That's all you need to pick up. Say open, Again, I had a couple of offline files, so let's say skip, 27 imported, 1 offline file skipped. And again, we'll see the location of where those images are, like so, animal, city, landscape, portraits. And then Capture One makes us a group here with any collections that you have in Lightroom, any current collections. I didn't have any, so it's just made me a quick reference to all the images like so. Thomas is asking, can I have a duplicate of the catalogue on, let's say, a laptop, copying the information from the workstation to be able to work to both? You could do, actually. Like what I do for the webinars is that I have all the images sit here. Sorry, this is the database for the catalog sitting on this external hard drive. And what I do, so I always start with a fresh catalog, which is how I expect. I always copy that to the pictures folder before I start a webinar. So I always have exactly the same catalog open each time. But if I then change that catalog and did some stuff that I wanted to keep, I could actually copy it back and overwrite that old catalog. So you could do that chop and change if you wish. Stefan saying, can I duplicate a project structure in user collections? No, you can't, but it's actually quite a good idea because I often have the same project template. So I agree that could be a nice idea. So thank you for suggesting it. I will take that back. So it's pretty easy to do the import. Just remember, be aware that if you start moving stuff around in Capture One, you break the Aperture catalog. So just consider what you want to do. There's really a few ways you could look at it. You could import your whole Aperture catalog if you wish and start working from there. You could say from a day moving forward, I'm going to start using Capture One, but I will maintain my old Aperture library just for sort of viewing and sorting. Or again, you could say from this day forward, I'm going to use Capture One. If there's any old work that I might want to repurpose, I'll import that into Capture One on a case-by-case basis. There's no right or wrong answer. It's entirely up to you. The last thing to maybe help you with a transition is Workspaces, really keyboard shortcuts, because they are different, of course. Capture One is not the same as Aperture. It's not the same as Lightroom. It does similar tasks, but its design is very different. So by default, we have tools on the left, viewer in the middle, thumbnails at the bottom. All of that in the view menu can be customized. So you could place the browser on the right if you wish. You could place the tools on the right if you wish. You might prefer that if you're coming from Lightroom, if you're more used to that sort of tools on the right experience, and so on. So just have a look in the view menu for sort of shifting stuff around. If you kind of get in a bit of a mess, you can always go back to the default workspace and you can save your workspaces. So default workspaces like so. Shortcut wise, you can edit all the shortcuts. So for example, on Lightroom, I was very used to pressing G to kind of get the grid up, and I just replicate the same in Capture One. You'll see here under Viewer, we've got Hide Viewer. By default, that's something pretty complicated. I will say Shift Command V or something, but I just changed it to G. So for example, if we go to Edit Keyboard Shortcuts, see I've got David set. What you'll see if you haven't touched this is default, but you need to duplicate the default and then you can start changing things. So let's say you wanted to do the basic thing like, let's just go back to the default. You can see here under View, Hide Viewer is Option Command V, which isn't particularly intuitive. So let's say you want to change that to G. Let's duplicate it and call it My Shortcuts, like so. And then we can go here, we click like so, press the X to clear it, and then press whatever you want in the keyboard in combination. So G, that now makes this hide and show viewer. So now if I press G, viewer hides, viewer comes back. Much better than doing Option Command V. That's kind of a bit of a silly shortcut. So any of those shortcuts you can modify in Edit Keyboard Shortcuts. Over here with all the various tool tabs, don't forget that if you right click, you can add a tool to a tool tab. You can remove a tool. You can remove an entire tool tab, like let's say you never shoot tethered. No point having the capture tool tab. Get rid of it. remove. Now it's gone. You can change the order. So if I do a command click, I can move this wherever I want to. All of these have shortcuts too. So option command 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So various different shortcuts. If you wanted to change, say, this one, if you're used to the develop module in Lightroom, you could change that to D to get you to the first tool tab, as an example. So there's all kinds of different things you can do to make it a little bit more familiar by changing the workspace, by changing the keyboard shortcuts. If you want to learn the keyboard shortcuts, just go to Help and look at Keyboard Shortcut Summary, and that will pop you up a list in a web browser like so. So don't be afraid to mess around with the shortcuts as such. Simon, sorry if I've got your name wrong. Where can we see the importing, culling and process webinar, please? You'll get a follow-up email which has the recording for this. That was last week's webinar, so that will be the previous one on the list, so you can watch that. And as I said, that goes into much more detail about importing, sorting with various different folders and tokens, doing nice stuff with the filters tool, which we didn't have time to cover today, organizing here, and exporting with process recipes as well. So that's process recipes are a super feature, not that you'll find in Lightroom to the extent that we have here. So try to watch that if you're interested. Pascal saying, can you add that a double click on the image closes the viewer? No, it doesn't, because again, it's different to what you're used to. So double click on the image with the cursor tool, for example, takes you to 100%. So remember, you could try to make Capture One as close to Aperture or Lightroom as possible, but at the end of the day, there are going to be some differences. No two softwares are completely similar, so it does take a little bit of time just to get used to the sort of idiosyncrasies between the two. But I think you'll be rewarded with the excellent tools that we have, of course, and the great color output we have, and so on and so forth. Xavier says, I mean by pressing HHH, it goes to the different tool in the handset. Oh yes, you can do Control H, or is it Shift H? Shift H, there we go. So I'm doing Shift H, which goes through the different hand tools. Crop tool, by the way, any of these which have an additional one, say if we're in crop, C for crop, if we right click, then we get the crop sub menu up. Same here for keystoning, right click, we can then play directly with the various different tools. So just have an explore. There isn't stacks like you know in Aperture, Tim, but you can make a variance. So that's just like virtual copies of the same image for different adjustments and so on. TIFF is supported for file management. PSD is not currently. So TIFF, yes. PSD, no. Okay, unfortunately, that takes us beyond our time for this week. I hope it's useful in at least getting started. I do sympathize that it's never easy learning a new application, unfortunately. We can try to make that as smooth as possible. So don't forget, sorry, what I meant to show was not that screen at all, was this screen. But don't forget that we do have our blog, blog.phase1.com, written by Niels, this guy here, and also by me and other guest photographers and so on. There's all kinds of various different tips on working with Capture One. This one, dynamic locations, that's pretty good for automatic sorting of folders and so on. Also, we've got the YouTube channel. Don't forget, one of the playlists, Capture One Pro 8 imaging software, has loads of different tutorials on using Capture One. There is the webinar archive. Sorry, you'll get access to the attendees archive, which is a little bit more recent, and then you can see the last webinar there. You'll get that link in an email in a couple of days' time. There's also the help site, help.phase1.com, all the written information that you need for Capture One. So, lots of different help resources. There will be a webinar next week. details which is going to come to you soon. So for reasons which I won't bore you with right now, the program will be updated on Monday of webinars going through from June to July. So have a look out for that on our events page, and in the follow-up email I'll try to link you to some new stuff as well. But just have a look out on your Phase 1 newsletters, events page and so on for information of new webinars coming up. Loads of fun stuff coming up in June and July with some guests as well.